Hey there, CPO here, and the next thing I want to start working on is the tail assembly. I have the front tail block and the rear tail block, and I'm going to go ahead and start figuring out what to do with these things. Where I'm at with the frame assembly is still just the main bearings installed. I know the manuals tend to go into servo installation, but the reality of it is I'm going to have to take those out anyway to install the motor. So I'm just going to keep going with the structural components of the helicopter first before I start actually working on the electronics piece. So there are a couple things we need to do here, and first of all, it's sort of like we did with the head. It's a disassembly process, then a reassembly process to make sure everything is properly Loctited and there's no binding in bearings, etc., etc. So I'm going to start here with this front block, and the reason is because it's really easy to work on. Literally, I can just pull this thing apart, and as you can see here, it just pulls apart. And basically, what I want to do is I want to look at these gears and these bearings here and make sure that there's no binding, all the teeth are there. And I do feel something. It could just be some play. But I'm going to take these out, and I'm just going to wipe down these bearings here, just to make sure there's no crud, you know, from the manufacturing process. Then I want to take a good look at all these teeth. Make sure there's none missing, which there's not. So this is the block now, just the empty piece of plastic. You can see these bearings fit into the little channels. Just like that. And then this will go this way. Like that. And again, I'm looking at the teeth, making sure that everything lines up okay and there's no missing teeth or anything crazy like that. No flashing on the plastic from the mold, and everything looks to be okay. And then the next thing I can do is just pop that back together and just check and make sure that's smooth. And it feels really smooth, so I think for now that's all I'm going to do with this particular piece. Okay, so now I'm going to focus on this rear block, and basically what I'm going to do is remove all of these screws and make sure that I reassemble with the thread locker. So I'm going to get to that. It shouldn't take me very long to disassemble here. So there are 3 screws holding this one side plate on. And basically they should come out pretty easy. And then this will actually just pop off, and what you have in here is a bearing assembly. I'm going to leave that all together. The next thing I want to do is take off this other side, but in order to do that I've got to remove this arm to be able to get to one of those screws. So I'm going to pop this guy off, and when you remove this little arm here, make sure you catch the fact that there is a washer in there between the bearing and the little arm that you just unscrewed from. So if you don't catch that, you'll miss it. And see, I don't know if you can see it there. So when I set this out, I'm going to make sure I set that washer somewhere where I don't forget it. Okay. With that removed, now I can get to, if I move that ball, this screw here, which is one of the three holding the other side together. Nice. Made a basket. So you can do it how you like, whether or not you decide to take the entire thing apart or just remove a screw at a time. My personal preference right now is to take everything apart, primarily because it helps me understand what all's going on, how it works. It's a great learning opportunity for me, and I also have the added benefit of doing this on video, so if I forget where something goes, I can always replay my own video and figure out what I did. So with that said, now I have this separated, and this is just looks like a plastic gear that's just slipped in there. You can pull this out. There's looks like an aluminum shim type deal with the bearing. So I'm just going to leave that in there because there's nothing I really need to do to check it other than make sure that all of the teeth are in good shape on that. Get this one screw out of here. So that's that. Now this piece, this shaft here, and it's the slide shaft, is actually thread locked together. I don't know if you can see this here, but it's a two-piece shaft, and it's threaded and screwed together and held with thread lock. Now the question I have is it thread locked or is it not? Most screws have not been thread locked, but I get a sense like the main components that need it do have it. This is pretty tight, so I'm kind of at a crossroad on a decision point of what I want to do here. Do I want to continue disassembling this to the point where I unthread this? It would require probably adding heat to disengage any thread locker that's already on there, perhaps using pliers to separate it. I run the risk of actually ending up in worse condition than I start with. So I think what I'm going to do, my decision, your decision may vary. My decision is going to be, I check this. I'm basically gripping onto this these teeth on this gear, and I'm turning it, and it's tight. It doesn't feel like it's going to break free. It actually hurts my fingers more than anything else. So I'm going to make an assumption that is thread locked in there because it's not breaking free. I'm going to keep an eye on it, but I'm not going to intentionally disengage it right now. I'll save that for when I need to actually disassemble that thing. Okay, so now I'm going to reassemble this assembly. Again, I feel comfortable that that's thread locked in there. I'm checking it. I'm not going to take it apart, but I am going to keep an eye on it. So I have to remember that this side here with the blade grips is going to go opposite of this side, just to stay out of the way of that boom mount. So basically you can see it's going to fit in there. There's these little knobs, ridges on the, I don't even know what to call this thing, on this side panel, and it's going to fit inside these holes. So it's going to be obviously line up one way, and you're going to be able to tell if you have it right. Now it will fit, you know, on both sides, I'm pretty sure. It doesn't feel like it wants to go, so maybe you'll be lucky even if you forget which way is which. But I think the key to remember here is that the blade grips are going to go opposite of this mount screws. So now that I have that, I'm going to get my trusty thread lock and thread lock some screws real quick. Now what I'll do is I'll just stab them on the end of my driver here, and that'll help me hang on to everything. Get this back lined up, And what you want to do is just lightly start these threads. Lightly. If there's any pressure at all, any tension, anything that feels like it's giving you friction or binding at all, stop. Because these are aluminum housings, and they will those threads will strip very, very easily. So there should be no binding at all. I mean, if you start to turn and you even feel a little bit of pressure, stop, back it out, and realign it. Like right there, I just felt a little bit of pressure. So I'm going to back it out and kind of readjust here. And what helps is if you leave the screws, the other screws, right, that you've already installed, leave them kind of loose so you can wiggle things around a little bit. It'll help you. But you should be able to go in with no pressure at all. See, now it's going in straight with no pressure. Once you get it through, you're good to go. So I'm going to tighten those two down now. Not too tight, just nice and snug. And then I have this little bar here. Get that through. Same thing. I'm actually holding the head of the screw and screwing in the bar. That's a safe way to do it without cross-threading. Oops, that would help if I use the right tool here. And then just kind of snug it down with my fingers, and I'll tighten that up again here in a second once I get the other side on. Now I'm going to capture the other side with this other panel, just like that. And I've got 3 screws to put in here. So I'm going to grab my trusty thread lock. I'm going to start this time with this little bar. Oops. And again, just light pressure. If there's any tension at all, stop. Pull it back out, realign it. Get my thread locker on. Again, screwing it in and just letting it kind of take hold itself. If there's any friction, I'm stopping. I'm only going to screw that one in about halfway for now because I want to get that other one started before I tighten anything down. Okay. Now I've got all 3 of them in. Go ahead and do a little bit of snugging. That's a technical term. And then I'm going to go back over here and just give this another little tweak since I had to hand hold it before. Okay, so everything should still spin nice and freely. Again, I'm making an assumption here that that is properly thread locked inside there based on how it felt to me when I took it apart. So hopefully I don't pay for that assumption later. The next thing I want to do is put this arm back on. Remember, I've got this little bitty shim washer here, tiny little guy, that goes onto the screw. So you have your screw through the bearing, and then this little shim washer. Then after I get that washer on, I'm going to apply just a touch of thread lock onto this guy. And I always say a touch, and then I end up putting a lot more than I intend to. And then basically what you need to do here is capture that ball and then set it on just like that. Again, really light pressure until it starts, and then you'll know once it's starting to get threaded through. And then snug that down. This should still move freely up and down after it's snug, which it does, so that's good. Now the next thing I have to do is, and I'm just going to remove these next pieces one at a time, thread lock and replace. So I have the tail assembly here, and I went through basically every single screw and removed it and then thread locked it. All three of these on each side. This center lock screw, each of the screws that go into these control arm linkages, all of that. There are a couple things I wanted to point out. As I was assembling, reassembling this assembly here, this blade grip linkage arms, what I found out is these screws here, let me use my little pointer here. These screws here that screw into these top blade grip arms, when tightened down, would tend to cause some pretty significant binding. Significant, I mean really significant, to the point that if I loosen them up, then it would be free again. Tighten them down, it would be binding. I checked the forums. That seems to be a fairly common issue with the Align T-Rex style tail assemblies. And a lot of people say, you know what, just leave them loose. There's Loctite that you can put, or I'm sorry, thread locker that you can put on the threads, of course, that will kind of lock the screw from backing out any further. I didn't really like that. I took it apart, started looking at how the thing works, and basically within this plastic arm here, there is a brass collar, kind of a sleeve. The screw goes through the brass collar, and then between the screw and the brass, and then this actual linkage bar, it kind of creates a guide for this plastic thing to spin on. So the problem was when you screw it in, if the brass sleeve is narrower than this actual plastic linkage piece, then the screw will bind against the plastic instead of allowing it to freely move. So what I did, I took both of these out, these brass collars, and I measured them. One was actually a little bit smaller than the other one. I also measured these, the widths of these plastic, I don't know what to call these arms here, these linkages, and actually one of them was a little bit narrower than the other. So what I tried to do is get a combination of which one had the longer sleeve with the longer side to see if I could get rid of the binding that way. It didn't really work out. I got one of them to work fairly well, but another one just it bound no matter what I did. So what I did is I took some sandpaper to this and kind of shrunk this down. I did a little segment where I tried to explain it. Unfortunately, it didn't all make it to the video. But basically, what I did is just sanded this down a little bit with a fine grit sandpaper to shrink this a little bit. And basically, what it did is it now with them both perfectly tightened down and Loctited, I've got plenty of free movement there. And it was just a matter of this plastic piece being wider than the brass collar that it was sitting on. Now the other option would have been to get a longer brass collar or to find a way to shim it, which would have been a little bit more complicated. So I just chose a route of sanding off a little bit of this plastic just slowly, and I would test fit it and sand a little bit more and test fit it and sand a little bit more until I got it to the point where I could tighten the screw head down. You know, not super, you know, He-Man tight, but tight to where I could feel that it was going to hold for a while, and then it worked well. So after that, I oiled between the plastic and the brass sleeve, and then I Loctited, thread locked the. I'm going to say Loctite and thread lock, you know, all the time. So I am not using Loctite brand. I am using Permatex brand, but it's thread locker. Anyway, so with that said, that is all nice and ready to go now. So what I'd like to do is start getting the rest of this tail assembly put together. So one of the things that I'd like to do is go ahead and put on the tail blades while I've got it here. So in looking at the manual, and this is kind of like one of those mind games. I have to figure out, okay, this goes like this, that goes like that. Okay, if you're holding it, so this would be looking at the front of the helicopter would be, you know, that way obviously, and then with this screws here for the stabilizer mount facing you, and basically the this tail assembly would be facing away from you. What you want to do is you want to position these so that they are like that. I don't know if you can see that. Let me give you a little bit more room here. So they're going to go just like this. At least that's what the manual shows. And then the bottom one will go the opposite way, like that. So I'm going to put these on in that direction, and then, you know, we'll see if it works out okay. So these are threaded screws going into metal. So I'll kind of test it, make sure I'm going the right direction here, which I am. It'll slide through one side, and then it'll lock into the other side. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and put some thread locker on that screw. Okay, so that's like that. I'm going to push that through. Got to make sure that the blade is in there. There we go. And then as far as how tight to tighten these down, I get it just snug and it's fairly loose. So that's the appropriate amount according to everything I can find. So I think we're going to be good to go there. And then I will install the other one. Get some thread locker here. Alright, and this one, again, if that one's like that, then this one's going to go this way. And I got to make sure I get it through the side that's going to push all the way through first. Then screw it into the other side, just you know, fairly snug. And that is like that. And that should be what I need. If I look at it as if the helicopter is you know, looking at it in the front of the helicopter is this way, I've got the cutout on, you see if you can see this, the cutout on this side on the top and on this side on the bottom. And so that should be exactly what I need. So very cool. We have hey, some progress happening. And of course, with this control arm ball with no binding, you can see how the pitch will adjust on that. Alright, next up we will be working with the tail boom. Okay, so here is the tail boom. Let me get some of this stuff out of the way, my nice scissors here. Tape measure I'm going to need here in a second. And thread locker can go away for a second. Okay, so I've got the tail boom, and then what I have in the package here is a couple things. This is the torque tube, and it comes with already pre-assembled this rubber piece on top of a bearing. So I know in some of the kits, I think the Align kit, it comes as a separate piece, and you got to put them together. Because this is already together, I'm just going to leave it together. I'm not going to worry about trying to separate them. Get some better light over here. I'm not going to worry about trying to separate them and then re-put them together. So What I need to do though is get a little CA glue and apply this so that I can glue it in place according to the manual's instructions. So how I'm going to do that is with a tape measure. So the manual says that you want to find the center point. So I'm going to use my trusty tape measure here. And this doesn't have to be exact, but we'll get it pretty close by eye. So the center point, this is going to be 7.5-ish where I have it lined up. So basically what I'm doing is I'm getting it pretty close. It's not exactly 7.5. If I start the end of the tube down at the end of the tape measure, it's probably going to be more like 7 3/8 or so. But that's approximately center of the tube. Now the next thing the manual says to do is to move the bearing forward by 10 to 15 millimeters from the center line. So from the neutral point, 10 to 15 millimeters. So I'm just using my micrometer here. You know, 10 to 15, that tells me I want to probably set it at 12 to 13. That's going to be a good middle point, and then that gives me some room for variance if I'm not perfectly accurate. So I'm going to set this for, I don't know, 12.43. That's fine for the purposes of this. So you can see now where my current center point is and where I want to apply some CA. Okay, so I'm gonna put some CA down here, right about where I marked that that new point. And I'm just gonna let it roll around there just a touch. Wipe off a little bit of excess. And then what I want to do is just carefully slide this from the first point identified to the point where I want to set it. And I went past it a little bit and then brought it back just to get that glue kind of moving around. The key here is you don't want to get, let's get some focus. You don't want to get any glue inside of that bearing. I'm trying to find a way. This is a long rod here, so you just want to be careful just to slide it on the rod, not let it get onto that bearing inside. There you go. There's a good picture of the bearing. Okay, so very important. If you do that, you're pretty much going to lock everything up. So I'm going to let that sit for a second and dry. All right, so we have our torque tube all dried up and ready to go. And that should be fairly stable. Our bearing freely moves. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put some oil on that. I'm just going to get it nice and coated with oil. Just kind of turn it as I go here. Now remembering, we moved it 10 to 15 millimeters forward of the center line. That's going to point this way. And the way you know which way it's going to point based off of your tube here is you've got a hole on one end. I don't know if you can see that. A hole on this end and a slot on this end. The slot is forward, the hole is backwards. And of course you can read the letters, which is another clue. I'm actually going to put a little bit of oil in the front of this to help grease the skids a little bit. And then when you push this in, should go right on through. And then this will now freely spin inside the torque tube. Next thing you're going to want to do is take your front block here, and I'm going to look at, it's going to go down just like this with this bottom gear, the flat gear, facing down. That's kind of important from a directional perspective to understand. And then basically what I'm going to do is just slide this through. You got to kind of open this up a little bit. And actually I can open up quite a bit. It's fairly loose. And push that torque tube in to where it pushes in all the way. And then I'm pushing the inside torque tube to where it engages those gears, and now I can turn them. So hopefully you can see that. Let me zoom in here. So now when I turn the back end of this, those spin. And that is basically ready to go. And then you can see what I have hanging out the back side here. And again, I just turn that. It turns nice and freely, and it's running this front piece here. So now we can focus on putting the back section of the tail on. So back to this assembly here. Again, looking at it, obviously the front of the helicopter goes this way. We've got this little plastic bridge piece here, and then two screws. We're going to take these completely out. And the reason is, number one, we need to take them out to put on the vertical stabilizer, but I also want to show you this little protrusion here, this little knob, the plastic knob. That goes through that hole, okay? And then what it's going to do is it's going to line up with this hole in the torque tube assembly, and that's what's going to keep it lined up exactly where it needs to go. So as you're putting it together, you're going to kind of move this around until you find that hole, and that's important, and that's where that comes from. So we have the vertical stabilizer, which is this carbon fiber piece here, and basically what you want to do is have it facing just like this, so that it goes around the back of the helicopter. The contours will look the same. I actually found this is probably going to be a little bit easier to do if I just let it rest on the blades. Get everything lined up. Both of those are going to just slip down in there. And they should freely turn in. If there's any resistance at all, stop, realign. I realize you're looking at my hand, but I'm just screwing stuff in here. There we go. Just to double check to make sure I'm still captured in that tube by that little plastic button, which I am. And then I can finish tightening this down. Doesn't have to be super monster tight. There we go. So that, ladies and gentlemen, is the completed end of the tail boom. Okay. So now we have a few other things to do here. First of all, let's just check function. If I turn these gears up front here, I do get proper function of the tail rotor. So I think everything is looking good. So I'm just taking a look at this front piece. Let me show you this. this front assembly. It's very loose, so as I'm messing around, the thing wants to come off. Not a big deal. You can double check the alignment. Remember that you've got this little slot here. It's going to align with the slot there. You can kind of see it inside there, right? So that's going to capture that. So as long as you have this thing pointed straight up, then this should fit in nicely over the top and kind of snap into place. Okay, see how that snaps? If you have any gaps here, then it's probably not captured in there correctly. And I'm just going to have to make sure that that holds there until I'm ready to mount it onto the helicopter. Okay, so the next thing we have to deal with is a couple things. We have a control arm here for the tail assembly, and then we have these two tail boom brace sets that we're going to deal with. There's a couple ways to deal with this. First of all, let's look at the tail boom brace assembly. Got to cut this out of the bag here. Basically what you have are two rods, and these already have the ends on them. And those are, two ends are going to, up front, are going to fix to the helicopter, and then two ends are going to mount back here on the tail boom. And then what we're going to use to mount those is this guy here. So I'm going to unscrew these two. So now what these are going to be used for is the horizontal stabilizer. Okay, so I need to get that out of the bag here. So this is the horizontal stabilizer, and it's actually going to point, arrow pointed forward, as you would imagine, and then it's going to sit on top of this piece. We just took the two screws out. Screws are going to go back through like that. Now the collar part is pointing forwards. Okay, so the tip of the arrow, you can see there's like an extended collar piece. That's going to point forward, and it's going to mount on the top of the tail boom like such. And what we're going to do, we're just going to loosely put this back on. I'm not even going to Loctite it just yet. Just going to get these started. We can't actually Loctite it because we don't exactly know where it's going to go yet. So it's just kind of loose. Maybe that's a little too snug. That's probably good right there. I want it to freely move around. And then you can see we have these two screws on the side, and that's actually where your tail boom brace is going to mount up to. Okay. Note to self, that's a different screw than the top. So now note to you. So I've got that side. I'm going to come over here to the other side. Just flip it upside down. Again, I'm not really ready to thread lock yet because I'm not sure exactly how all this is going to go. I just want to get it in place. So now, as you can see, I've got the boom support assembly that'll be hanging down from this, and it's actually going to go like that somewhere. When it gets to the point where I lock this thing down, the manual actually says to use Scotch tape, to apply Scotch tape to wrap it around the tail boom before you put this on. I'm not sure if that's exactly how I'm going to do it or not. I'll make that decision when I get there. I may use something else. I may use like shoe glue or something to lock it in place. But either way, that's how that's going to go. So we're getting closer, almost ready to actually mount this back to the frame of the helicopter. Okay, so the last thing I'm going to put on right now is going to be the linkage rod for the tail rotor. So I think this is a new design, and I want to point this out because this seems a little bit different than what I've seen from the Trex builds, and it's definitely different than what I see in the manual here. This is a carbon fiber linkage rod. The end links are already pre-installed. I'm assuming probably already set to a specific length. And it's carbon fiber, it's not aluminum, and there is a single kind of a little aluminum slider that goes across. Now there's only one of these on the entire linkage rod, and there's only one of these linkage rod holders, which is a departure from what's in the manual and what I've seen in other builds where they have two of these. And two of them that have to be held on with zip ties. This looks like an upgrade, a recent upgrade. This is actually a screw-held linkage rod holder that will tighten down with a screw, and then the linkage rod will rest inside this little aluminum sleeve and allow it to slide back and forth. So I think this is kind of an upgraded, since the manual was built, kit. Or at least component. So I think it's pretty cool. We'll roll with it. In order to get this on though, I need to do one thing, and that is I'm going to go ahead and pop this front control piece off again. I'll even leave the bearings there. I just need to be able to get this over the top without, I don't want to stretch it out too far. This is where I need my third hand. Ideally, actually, I am going to take this off. Ideally, I probably should have put this on before I got this far, but hey, no big deal. That will go back through there. Again, we capture that in the correct fashion. That gets captured in the right fashion. And I'm not quite caught yet. There we go. All right, so that's all back to where it was. And basically all I did was slip this little plastic piece on. Now the interesting thing is when you have two, you have one on either end. When you have one, you really end up with one kind of in the middle of the helicopter. So I'm gonna just roughly stick it right there. I'm not even gonna worry about trying to tighten it down just yet. There's a lot of work to do still on getting this thing set up. But what I am gonna do is go ahead and slip this sleeve inside there, tighten it up just enough, hopefully, to kind of hold that sleeve in place. There we go. So that's kind of rough fit. It's actually quite tight. So I might have to loosen it up here in a minute. The other thing I can do is go ahead and install my end link on the ball. Remembering A goes out. So just like that. Zoom in here. As you can see, the A, hopefully you can see, the A is facing up, okay? So I can snap this on now, just like that. So now this linkage rod is going to be controlling the pitch of these blades. And that's it for now. I think the next steps will be to mount the rest of this assembly onto the main frame of the helicopter, and that's where we'll pick it up next. So I appreciate you watching, and you know, as usual, if you have any questions or you see anything you have concerns about, please let me know. Otherwise, I will catch you on the next video.